This is What If I Told You, the event psychology video podcast for event professionals in which Victoria Mady, event consultant and host, talks with the world's top minds in behavioral science, neuroscience, and psychology on how to transform events using insights about human behavior and mind. For more science-based tips, join Event Psychology Club at eventpsychology.gumroad.com. Also, check out Victoria's online course, Event Psychology Lab, at eventpsychology.thinkific.com, which covers key behavioral science concepts and offers research-backed solutions to your event challenges. This course is a unique opportunity to upgrade your industry skills and gain a competitive edge without adding to your already busy schedule. Now, enjoy the conversation.
Hello, I'm Victoria Mady, and this is What If I Told You, the event psychology podcast, where I talk all things event psychology, that is how to apply brain science insights in events. Today, I'm chatting with Vanessa Moss. Dr. Vanessa Moss is a radio astronomer based at CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency, working at the boundaries between astronomy, telescope operations, and data science. She is a strong advocate for the process of optimizing all interactions by maximizing accessibility, inclusivity, and sustainability. And she's a co-deputy chair of the EMCR Forum under the Australian Academy of Science, which represents and supports early career researchers across Australia. Welcome, Vanessa. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me, Victoria. I'm looking forward to chatting with you.
I discovered your Twitter profile by chance. And in addition to my fascination with astronomy as a subject and your scientific work in the field that I don't know anything about, but, I was surprised to see your active involvement in the future of events topic. Then I read your scientific articles, and those articles are examining the benefits of virtual and hybrid formats and the topics of sustainability and inclusivity that comes with online events. And I got so many questions. So I just hope that we'll have time to go through all of those questions. But first, how did you become involved with the work in the area of events? And specifically, I would like to ask you, why are you advocating virtual and hybrid formats?
Yeah, sure. So I think, science as a field is always about pushing boundaries, right? It's about like going beyond what we can do today, asking questions about, the universe, in my case, because I'm in astronomy. I think astronomy as a field, it's kind of small. Like when you compare astronomy, there's maybe 10,000 professional astronomers worldwide. So it's a relatively small field when you look at something like geophysics or things like that. But it's actually a really progressive and quite tech savvy field. So a lot of, innovation comes out of astronomy. We often try to do, a lot with a little, and you get some sort of technological spin-offs and stuff from that too. So I think that sort of helps. Like, in astronomy, we're always willing to try new things and, go beyond what we're doing today. Specifically, I got involved. So in 2019, we always sort of think about, is what we do best practice? Like, are we doing what's best for our communities and for society at large? We were having conversations about sustainability, especially because we were sort of reflecting, okay, we have a world that's rapidly feeling the effects of human-driven climate change, right? And all of these things that are starting to happen, we're seeing the extreme events. How do we make our practices more sustainable? And so one of the key things is electricity and supercomputing, but another key one was travel. And we realized we were sort of like traveling around the world, traveling to conferences without even questioning it. Like, despite the fact that in astronomy, we use technology all the time to make things better. We use the most advanced telescopes to look at the universe. Why aren't we changing how we work here? So that was one element. And also to do with access, people can't go to our events. Like, most people in astronomy have an experience where they've missed out on something because they couldn't go. And so I think that accessibility and inclusivity factor became really strong as sustainability. And you suddenly realize here's a way to be better in different cases, right? You can be more open as a community, share knowledge better, but you can also help save the planet. So it's like, hey, wins all around. So I think that's why virtual and hybrid stands out so much, because it's a way to actually, we want to make things better, and we also want to do the right thing. You can also save money. So like, I don't know, there's not a lot of downsides. So to me, it seems really logical. I think one other factor was mixed reality technology. So obviously the technology we're using to speak, the internet, that's all become quite advanced. But we're also seeing things like in 2019, the Oculus Quest suddenly hit this critical mass factor. It became this standalone headset that you could put it on and easily have a virtual reality experience. You could be somewhere else with other people around the world. And so we realized in the TFOM stuff when we were starting it, that technology was really going to be a game changer here. And many of our practices were kind of like old and just taken for granted as the best format. So, so yeah, we really wanted to challenge that and explore how we could do better.
And so what difference do you see, if you compare, say, events in 2019 and events now?
Well, I can even see for myself, like, I wasn't questioning it. I wasn't thinking that things could be different, like you just sort of, like I said, you take for granted that this is how it's going to be. And so the last thing I did in 2020 was I live in Sydney. I flew to Perth for like a retreat and for collaboration and some training. Like it was like a good solid thing, like, but it was still flying. And then I had trips planned, like I was going to go to a workshop in Georgia in the US and something in Italy as well. And, even though, I wasn't questioning it because I didn't have a choice. Nobody was offering hybrid. Nobody was offering virtual. Everyone just sort of saw that as this backup option, okay, well, if you can't do it, if someone really puts their foot down, maybe we'll let you dial in as a remote speaker. And because of that, it meant that those formats just weren't used at all, like they weren't utilized. And so I think that's one thing we've seen that's really changed.
So what I hear is, and it looks like, and I actually, I feel the same, that we need that critical mass so that, things start to change. Don't you think so? I mean,
yeah, definitely.
We always follow what others do, mostly, right?
Frustratingly.
And it took a pandemic, right, to change things on a general level, right, for many events, for example, at the same time. And I think nothing else has changed, but we suddenly realized that we can do things differently.
Yeah, no, I mean, like it's really hard. And I think, if you look back in history at significant terrible events, other plagues, wars and stuff, they are often catalysts for big changes because, they just shake everything up about what we assume we know. And suddenly you're like, okay, well, hey, maybe women can work in roles that aren't just these stereotypes, or maybe we can fly technology and use it for our daily lives. And so I guess, I think that's one of the positives of the pandemic. And it's not just how we meet, like, we showed, okay, hey, we can use Zoom, we can use video calls, we can use other kinds of technologies like the OWL hybrid camera stuff. We can do better there. And also like how we work, there was already this predicted trend that remote work would become bigger, but suddenly everyone was in that position, no choice. And we're like, hey, this is really cool. Like flexibility is great. Like doing what works for me works really well. And so, for all of the horrible negative impacts the pandemic has had, it's also had like some really positive outcomes too.
But coming from events industry, I can tell you that we have, this ongoing debate, in-person versus virtual versus hybrid. And there are different considerations, all of them valid and legit. But I wonder, and I talk to people from other industries as well. And based on what I see from, on your feed and from what you share, it looks like people from academia, astronomy at least, are very supportive of virtual format. And I wonder why it's so different, why it varies across industries. And what do you see? I mean, why do you think, what are the reasons you think for why it is so different for your field?
Yeah, it's interesting you say supportive. I guess there's like different levels because I feel like I'm constantly running uphill trying to convince people what seems like a very logical argument about how we can do better. Yeah, I mean, it's varied across the field of astronomy. It's varied depending on the scale of the kinds of events and conferences. Like what we're seeing is the biggest conferences with hundreds or thousands of people are less, I don't know, open to change because they have a certain momentum and their tradition and stuff. So that's harder. Smaller events, definitely, you know, we've seen more adaptation. I've actually been like, I mean, I'm not nationalistic in any sense, but I've actually been kind of proud of Australia in a way, like looking at the Astronomical Society of Australia, which is our astronomy governing body here. They've said, you know, they recognize all the challenges, but they said hybrid because they actually care about inclusion. And so they really want to explore that. And I think that's great because we're not seeing that from all societies. We're not seeing that from all governing bodies. And yeah, so it's kind of nice to see Australia being progressive in this sense and maybe setting an example that other parts of the world can follow. In terms of why like academia in general is shifting or open to change, I think we're typically very low budget compared to maybe commercial scale conferences, almost always non-profit and not commercially driven. You know, our conferences are not about selling products. They're not about like that, you know, they can be about advertising commercial partners or something, but it's really at its core, it's about people meeting, interacting, open knowledge, sharing information in a global community. So when you start to say, hey, look, how we're doing this is challenging those goals, then it sort of becomes this inconsistency you have to deal with. And so that drives a bit more of our decision making, maybe. We're also open to higher risks, not to the extent like, you know, we obviously, a lot of societies are actually worried about getting bankrupt. Like if they do something too different, then, you know, because we're nonprofit, because all of it is just funded by like people attending, it's actually really hard. So yeah, I think that can sometimes cause some conservatism, but in general, we're open to change. And yeah, and I think like there's a mentality about the community embedded in all of our events and meetings. It's like, it's about the community and supporting the community. So if what we're doing is not doing that, then we really should change it. So I think those sort of factors work in our favor, and I'm hoping the rest of the world will follow, because ultimately, like, if we look back at why people get together in conferences, it's like, it's supposed to be about those interactions. It's supposed to be about what's best for the people coming, not what's best for, I don't know, money necessarily.
You recently said in your tweet, much of the world, especially USA, is rushing back to in-person as if that's the only path forward. So I'll continue to be grateful to every organizer who enables attending in a hybrid way, even when tech or time zone is not ideal. Thanks for making the world a bit more open. But I know that a lot of planners are struggling with virtual solutions still. And, you know, those struggles range from engagement to budget considerations to, you know, actual tech. And so I wonder, what do you see? And do you think that in-person only is the thing of the past?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, so our group, the Future of Meetings, we're kind of like this community of practice. We started as a virtual event. We actually very briefly discussed hybrid early on, and we're like, nah, let's just do it. Let's be experimental. Let's try something new and just flip everything around. But I think like what we found over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of advice giving to other conferences or helping them make decisions and stuff. And we found that like it's been important to sort of reflect on what in-person has value for. And that's something I think people are still sort of figuring out, is like, okay, well, you want to get people together. Why? Like, what's the point? And in person, so we have this list. We're sort of like figuring out what to do with it, but it's like, okay, things that are good in person are stuff like difficult conversations or social interaction, eating meals. It's kind of hard to eat meals in VR right now. You know, networking, introducing new people, like allowing new people to sort of integrate with the community. So they build up those initial relationships so that, you know, if the rest of the communication is online, it's okay because they've sort of got this initial starting point. And so I don't think in-person events are going away. I think they should be used how they're valuable for those kind of purposes where it actually makes sense. And then for other things, we sort of look at, okay, what could we do in other formats? And just sort of reduce it significantly because we kind of have to for lots of reasons. It's interesting though, because if you ask most communities, which we have, they're like, often people say, oh, hybrid is the future. And the reason they say that is because it sounds like this silver bullet. It's like, oh yeah, you get in person, you get online, everyone's happy. You know, all those people that can't make it, that's okay, they're online. There's a lot of problems with that, which I'm sure you're aware of, because hybrid creates two classes of attendance. It's really hard to bridge that gap. And also a lot of people say hybrid, assuming they're going to be the privileged people going in person, right? They just assume, oh yeah, I'll just do what's normal and what's good for me. And all those like people who are can't afford it or have caring duties or health problems, they can just attend online and that's good for them. And so it makes people feel good about kind of a bad choice, really. That's not to say hybrid can't be done. And I think for big, I kind of feel like unless there's a really good case, hybrid is the minimum. So say you're doing an event and you're saying, okay, well, come together in person. Anything passive content, anything that's like not drinking coffee should be hybrid. Like it should be available online, because otherwise you're saying, you know, because of your lack of privilege, you can't take part. And that's really bad, right? So I think hybrid should be the minimum in general, unless the event is just in-person stuff. And they do everything they can to try and include those who can't otherwise come, like funding, support, scholarships, or hubs or stuff. And then virtual formats are just completely underutilized at the moment. A lot of the frustration for me has been looking over the last 2 years and seeing people hate on online formats. They're like, oh, online doesn't work. It's so disengaging. And it's really just about kind of a lot of it is bad design, bad execution. And then you combine that with tech problems. And yeah, it's a really bad experience. But what we've found in the future meetings is that there's so much potential in online. We just haven't found it yet because we've got, I don't know, tens of thousands of years of perfecting the art of in-person, but only less than a century of this online sort of technology. So yeah, I guess it's a kind of a long-winded way of saying I think in-person interaction still has value, but not in the ways we were using it before. And we should change our formats to match that.
It's an interesting point that you make about how we frame and how we position online and in-person experience, so that we need to make sure that people don't feel like it's a secondary option and it's a worse option, right? So we need to frame it in the way that it's both equal options that provide you with an equal experience. It's just different modes of getting that experience, right? I know you shared with me some of those statements that you hear often from the pro in-person folks, and like the socializing and networking doesn't work online, and recorded talks are not as good or as engaging as live talks, right? And like you said, and I should say, to me, such opinions seem to be based on unwillingness to change the status quo, first of all. And we have already talked about that. It's pretty hard for people to change. But also from those first impressions that we got from online events when we massively pivot to virtual, right? Because those first impressions were not good, particularly good, right? Yeah. And I think we know from psychology that first impression matters a lot. So I think that kind of, is relevant for why we are thinking about online in this way right now. But also because the improvements in this area are pretty slow. And like you said, we have a lot of experience planning the in-person events, but not so much with online events yet, right? Comparing both formats. So obviously, the improvements are slow, but also because I believe it's slow because we fail to recognize the behavior-based factors that come into play, and findings from behavioral science that can help us improve event experiences. So I wanted to ask you, in one of your tweets, you said that we need to ensure to get better with designing events online. Do you think that brain science insights could help us improve online events? And the second part of that question, have you ever applied any such findings to your events?
Yeah, so I guess to the first point, absolutely. I mean, I think what we're seeing wrapped up, like you point out, in all of this is culture and attitudes and, how humans behave in circumstances. So absolutely, I think that, we need to think carefully about, well, one of the problems with all of this, right, is that online and working from home is at the moment inextricably combined with pandemic and negative impacts of pandemic and sickness and worry and anxiety and stressful situations, because people did these things for the first time while also dealing with the consequences of a pandemic and possibly job insecurity and all kinds of other horrible factors. So, I mean, I'm not a psychologist at all. I haven't done behavioral science. I sometimes wish I had. Maybe I'd be like better at, understanding how people behave. But because sometimes it's like, what is going on here? This is baffling.
But on any level, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's really, because people will form really strong opinions. It's become a very polarized topic, like especially in astronomy, we've seen this. And anytime something's polarized, it's really difficult to fix, because people often they're not very good at meeting in the middle. They just become more polarized. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I definitely think that the psychology aspect of this is really important and not as well explored as it could be. Like, we also saw a lot of online events were just taking in-person formats and porting them directly online, mm-hmm. as if that mm-hmm. was working. Like, and honestly, in-person formats weren't perfect anyway. Like, there's a lot of issues with them too. So yeah, so like that, thinking about, okay, well, what has changed? What context are people in? Where's their brain at? They're dealing with distractions, that sort of stuff. How do we design things to be better, shorter, better time zone usage, making use of recordings, mm-hmm. asynchronous? Yeah, so absolutely. In terms of what we've done, I mean, we've always lamented the fact actually that we don't have like direct involvement in TFOM things from psychologists. So maybe we can collaborate. But just thinking, we've looked at like papers and stuff that have been published, mm-hmm. But a lot of what we've done has been, I guess, sort of empirical, like experimenting and trying things and trying mm-hmm. to learn from the experiences directly that we've had people at events we've been involved with, and also, I guess, reflecting on what people in our communities are saying. So mm-hmm. in favor of events and against them, like online, mm-hmm. And just trying to merge those two. So one of my big, and this, like, you sort of start to play like anti-virtual event bingo after a while, because the same arguments come up again and again. And one of the one that's really, like, I already said how people saying online doesn't work because they had bad experiences with badly designed online. Okay, that's annoying. The other one is we've seen a lot, like, it reminds me of the Simpsons episode where it's like, think of the children, like, and it's like this argument generally, like, almost always made by senior people saying, we have to go back to how it was. We have to go back to in person, because what about the junior researchers? And in the junior researcher community, you have sort of two things. One is they sort of, they're like, well, the senior people are saying it, so it must be true. So it's hard to challenge that when you're in a position of lower power. But the other thing is, a lot of the junior researchers are actually a lot more nuanced in their opinions. They care about the state of the world, they care about inclusivity, and they kind of want to find better ways to do things. So this argument, and also, like, so many junior researchers have benefited from online. Like, so for example, students who couldn't go to conferences because of the costs, or, they couldn't present, things like that, they've been able to do that and have access to content they wouldn't normally have. And just, yeah, like the fact that online access often costs a lot less than in person. Plus you don't have travel, you don't have accommodation, you don't have food costs. So the world opens up a lot more for a junior researcher than it did when we relied on going there in person, because you just don't have the funding support to do that. So I think it's very wrong to say that, online has harmed junior researchers. It's in many ways benefited people, but we just haven't fully optimized it yet. So yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I think we need more behavioral science, because we need to understand more about where people are coming from in order to try and actually get these big cultural changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do agree. In your Nature article, you and your co-authors say that virtual event challenges are real, but do not outweigh the benefits. And I just want to share the quote. It requires us to give deep thought to the concept of why we want or need to meet at all, and to disconnect from two key assumptions. Firstly, that what we would do in person is what we should do virtually. And secondly, that our standards for in person were ever best practice to begin with. And, I think, you actually touched upon that just now, but I think these are pretty behavioral science based statements, because, basically we need to reevaluate how we did the in-person, learning or networking in the first place, and then, go from there, right? Would you elaborate or add something to that?
Yeah, so I would say I think one of the things that's most exciting to me about this sort of area is that it's truly cross-disciplinary. Like often in astronomy, we talk about cross-disciplinary, like, oh, we cross over with data science and computer science and data visualization and stuff. But this is actually solving this problem of, okay, how do we interact better in the future? That's something everyone can contribute to. It's a problem for everyone right now. And so that's been great because suddenly, you can work with behavioral psychologists, you can work with computer scientists, you can learn from all of these things. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the amazing things. There's been so much work over the years in different fields about this topic, but now's a good chance to try and bring it together. And I don't think globally we've done the greatest job of that yet. It's sort of getting there, but there's a lot more to do. Like I said, I'm not a behavioral scientist, but I do observe the behavior of scientists a lot. So, and like the strange things they do or don't do, or like some of the good things too. And so, yeah, so that what we talked already about, like the criticism of online formats and how often it's not well founded. Like, I mean, I don't know how you fix those first impressions, like you said, because it has really harmed things because people just think it doesn't work. And so they have to go back to normal. I think the other thing is, it's like normal is safe. Like the status quo factor is huge, right? Because change is hard. Change could go wrong. Change could like upset people. Whereas, well, it sort of worked okay before. So maybe we just do that. Online, we haven't found the best practice yet, but that's the exciting part. Like it's like, there's so much to explore. There's so much we could do better. There's so many opportunities to do more than we could do in person, like have events that connect people for longer times, or, meet in different ways, interact in different ways, be connected with a really global community, not just the ones who could get there. And I don't know about you, but like, for me, it seems like people have really rose-tinted glasses about how good in-person was. Like, I went to lots of in-person things as a, early career researcher, and I remember like how many people were on their laptops or how empty the lecture theater was because people weren't there. They were off exploring the city or socializing or whatever, like, or how much passive content it was. It was like, for us a long time, it was like 90% talks. But when you ask people what they're missing about conferences, it's not the talks at all. It's the serendipitous hallway conversations. It's the networking. It's all of these things that we completely undervalued in the original events, but we act like that was all that it was about because that's the hardest thing to do online. So they're like, oh yeah, that's what we got to get back to. And so, yeah, maybe those things have the most value, but we didn't focus the events on that. They just sort of happened. And often they happen by accident rather than intent. Like all of the planned social networking events, like, I don't know, most of them I ever went to were super awkward. Like they weren't very well done. And maybe that's an astronomy thing. I don't know. But like, speed meet a mentor was never great, or like, and it actually works better online because you can make proper connections. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we have a long way to go to figure out exactly what even a good, optimized, effective in-person event looks like. I feel like one thing that's missing, and it's something we've talked about, is metrics for success. Like, a lot of people just anecdotally say that an in-person conference worked for them, but what does that mean? Like, what did they actually tangibly get out of it? Did they form a new collaboration? Did they publish a new paper? Did they meet someone new for the first time that they actually then supported or worked with later? We've never measured those things. We just wave our hands in the air and say, oh yeah, it was better for that. But, once we start to measure them, maybe actually we'll realize that online can contribute as much or more to that. there's a really interesting project going on in the EU. We crossed paths with some historians. It's called SciConf, Science Conference. So they've been studying the evolution of scientific conferences in the 20th century and sort of just detailed case studies. And I went to online or hybrid Lorenz in a workshop that was run by them. And that was so eye-opening, again, with this cross-disciplinary thing, because you realize, hey, like, we can learn a lot from the past. And one of the big takeaways for me was that our conference formats, the way we run them, the way we design them, hasn't changed a lot in the last century. There was a big sort of shift. Like, I mean, not a historian, talk to them to find out more. But like from what I saw, there was a big shift towards like at the start of the 1900s or late 1800s, where science was less about just for elite people, but more about getting people together and conferencing. So that sort of was like the birth of this open conferences. And then kind of like post World War II, there was a lot of work done to optimize what diplomatic conferences look like and the rules for good conference engagement and how you follow them. But it kind of feels like we haven't really done that in the last at least 60 years, again, like in detail. And so much has changed in that time, technology and the global nature of the world and the internet. And so it just kind of feels like we're really overdue to redesign things. But change is hard. So I don't know how we get there. I honestly don't.
So I believe this is where behavioral science can help us. So, I want to ask you a couple more questions, like a speed round. As an academic who writes papers on events, do you feel that studying behaviors in event settings is necessary? And how do you think it can help make more informed decisions about formats and, the event design in general?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm a scientist, so I love data. I generally think to understand something, you need to measure it. And like measuring can be quantitative or qualitative, but whatever it is, you got to characterize it to understand it. So yes, I think definitely we need to be doing more analysis and assessment of events and figuring out behaviors. And obviously the human factor is huge. So in the TFOM stuff coming out of the symposium we ran, we tried to come up with sort of like guidelines for people to approach events with. We had something called DISERV. And so that stood for digital first. And that's like, just not focusing too much on in person. The accessibility, inclusivity, and sustainability aspects. Experiment, which I know like not everyone's keen on experimenting, but like at some point you got to experiment because otherwise you just do the same thing forever. But then using the right tool approach, value is an important one. Like people can take more ownership versus trying to just outsource effort, work with people who like outsource effort where it's really valuable. That's like the key thing we've sort of found. But the E there is evaluation, which we don't really do very well. We often just run an event and just like say, okay, cool. And maybe you get some feedback. So we don't do anything with it. And it's sort of like not an optimized process. What we found also, we learned working with kind of like a expert evaluator based in the UK, is that evaluation actually starts before the event, right? You think about what are the goals of it? What does success look like? Do you want to do a pre-survey to understand where people are coming from and whether it changed? Like there's so much more we could be doing to measure what a good event looks like. We haven't really ever tried to characterize that properly. Like it's sort of, I mean, maybe in your field they have, but in astronomy, certainly we just sort of like go, oh, look, it was great because people turned up and they had fun, but that's not scientific at all. For me, also questions we should be asking is like, does it need to happen in person? If so, why? Or what are the goals? What's the cost benefit? Does it need to happen synchronously? Like, is live necessary if 99% of the people are sitting in passive silence listening to something that could have been a recording? Like, is that the right way to use people's time? Applying scientific thinking from all fields, including behavioral science, to how we interact is hugely important. And I hope we see more of that over the next couple of years to just really change what's assumed to be the best.
Well, I certainly hope so. What are your top 3 scientific articles about events that you would recommend event professionals to get familiar with?
It's a good question. So obviously I I sit closer to astronomy, so mine tend to sometimes focus on that, or at least like science sort of things. One paper that comes to mind is, so Leo Vercha, who is we've never actually met in person. We were trying to reflect on that because we've been working together for the last couple of years, and he just assumes we'd met when I was in the Netherlands. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure we've never met. Like, those things people say you can't form relationships online with people, you can't have good working. Completely untrue. It's about having shared interest and shared goals and shared common stuff, right? Leo's done a lot of work in this space, especially focused on sustainability. One of his Nature Astronomy papers looked at the carbon footprint of large astronomy meetings specifically, and I can send you the links after. And that paper, obviously for astronomy, but applies to any large meeting. So I think it's really, he's looking a lot at it with his co-authors from the perspective of sustainability, so the carbon footprint, but there's other factors as well. And I think they touch on that as well in the article. So definitely check that out, especially sustainability is just going to become more and more important in events, even if, we need laws to tell us what to do. Those laws are coming. They have to, otherwise our planet is doomed. So I think that's going to be a key factor going forward. I mentioned also junior people's voice in this, like early career researchers, or just like young people in events, and how frustrating it is to hear senior people speak on behalf of these young people and not, junior people, and not necessarily reflect their views. So there's another paper, and they were early career researchers, or they are, and they were basically writing it from their perspective. So the need for sustainability in the future, but also for good opportunities and junior researchers being prioritized. And it was just a very balanced view that, to me, hit home that this is the voice of the early and mid-career researchers. So listen to that. You don't get to speak on behalf of them. We need to see what they want and actually design our solutions around them. And then the last paper, this is kind of an odd one. This is from Human-Computer Interaction from 1992. This was brought to my attention. So we've been working with computer scientists and human-computer interaction people, and Matt Adcock from CSIRO also pointed it out. And it's become such an interesting paper to look back on. So it's called Beyond Being There. And it was writing about how so many of the problems with the technology and the interaction technology that gets developed is it's really, really focused on trying to reproduce in person. It's saying what we want is just a face-to-face conversation, and that's what technology should do. But that's just one thing it can do. And actually that sort of limits the potential of technology. When you think about the biggest innovation, things like text messaging, we can't do that in person, but they've changed our lives. Slack is amazing. So many collaborations and things for me have been done on Slack, but you can't do that online, in person, right? You can't just brain text people or something. So going beyond being there, using technology and online and hybrid formats to do things we couldn't do in person, to me seems like that's a really good kind of thing for people to think about and make sure we're using the right formats in the right ways.
All right, thank you for those. Definitely, I will post all the links to those papers in the show notes as well. My last question is, the podcast title is "What If I Told You?" Can you complete the sentence with one takeaway relevant to our conversation?
Well, firstly, I was going to say, I don't know what everyone else has said, so I hope this isn't repeating it. But mine would be, what if I told you that we haven't really changed how we meet in a century, despite everything else that changed in the meantime? And I think that's a big question I ask myself a lot.
That sums it up really well. Thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate your time and that you shared so many interesting thoughts with the listeners today. Thank you for tuning in to What If I Told You, the Event Psychology podcast. All the links will be in the show notes, and I also invite you to join the Event Psychology Club to get other insights and this episode recap. Until next time, bye-bye.